For the second year in a row, the U.S. bishops have encouraged Catholics to observe what they're calling a fortnight for freedom, a period of 14 days during which we, as a community of faith, pray for our nation and increase awareness of threats to religious liberty.
We thought that we would suggest some thematically appropriate films that you can watch together as a family during the coming 2 weeks, beginning on Friday, June 21st, with the Feast of St. Thomas More, and concluding on Independence Day. You know, as the Fortnight of Freedom enters its second year now, religious liberty continues to be under heavy assault around the world and also in the United States, which is why the American bishops implemented it. Last year's Fortnight of Freedom focused on the HHS mandate and the bishops' objections to the Catholic Church being forced to subsidize immoral forms of healthcare like contraception and abortion. This year, the focus is on marriage, religious liberty with regard to marriage, and particularly whether the Church's understanding of traditional marriage is going to be allowed to stand, or if same-sex marriage is going to be forced down the Church's throat in various forms. Because marriage is the focus, I think we can't get away without mentioning a movie that we've talked about many times before. Of all the Fortnight for Freedom films, A Man for All Seasons is the one where the definition of marriage is really at the center of the character's struggle for religious freedom and sticking up for his conscience. And it's one of my favorite films, and certainly appropriate for the feast day of Thomas More and St. John Fisher.
Then there's Becket, another movie about the other martyred British Thomas, St. Thomas Becket, the 12th century Archbishop of Canterbury, who was murdered by forces loyal to another King Henry II, over a dispute arising over the monarch's infringement on church rights.
For another depiction of a martyred church cleric in a more contemporary setting, one of my favorite films is Romero, starring Raul Julia as the Archbishop of El Salvador, Oscar Romero, who was murdered celebrating Mass. He was a fiery preacher who ran afoul of government forces for his passionate defense of the rights of his people.
And while we're in Latin America, I guess we should mention For Greater Glory, which we discussed extensively last year, about the Catholic martyrs of the Cristeros War in Mexico in the early 20th century, who died giving heroic witness to their faith.
Speaking of witness, I think my favorite film about the life of Pope John Paul II, my favorite screen presentation, is the movie Witness to Hope, which is based on the biography of John Paul II by George Weigel. George Weigel appears in the production, and it dramatizes in very powerful ways the young Karol Wojtyła's clashes, specifically with regard to liberty, including religious liberty, both against the Nazi regime and also against the Soviets in Poland.
Two other films, one about communism and another about Nazism, are The Prisoner, starring the late great British thespian Sir Alec Guinness, a convert to Catholicism, yes, who plays a Catholic cardinal in an unnamed communist country who's arrested on sort of trumped up reasons of treason, and also Sophie Scholl, The Final Days, which documents and chronicles the real-life story of three young Christian students and members of a nonviolent anti-Nazi resistance movement who were arrested and ultimately executed during the Second World War.
Yeah, very powerful film. Especially for families, I want to pick one film that is my second favorite animated Bible story, The Prince of Egypt, second only to The Miracle Maker, the story of Jesus, but the story of Moses freeing his people from slavery in Egypt. It's a film that profoundly captures Moses' experience of God and his desire to see his people freed from slavery and free to worship God with the freedom that he has seen after leaving Egypt.
And finally, no discussion about movies dealing with themes of liberty would be complete without at least mentioning Frank Capra's iconic ode to American idealism, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, starring Jimmy Stewart as the patriotic Jefferson Smith. You know, Jefferson Smith is an idealist, but he's also a realist, particularly when he says that liberty is too precious a thing to be buried in books. It has to be held out in front of you every day of your life. You know, the famous filibuster scene is still one of the most memorable scenes ever filmed in Hollywood.
There's a lot of great suggestions here. We've got a lot of more great suggestions. I have a list of 14 films for the Fortnight for Freedom that you can find at decentfilms.com or on our Facebook page.
And to find out more about Fortnight for Freedom, you can visit the Bishop's website at the address below.